Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Brittany. The weather has been so nice. It's been very warm lately. I mean, today's a little bit chillier, but we got to take the kids to the park and really loving the sunshine, especially after, winter when it's dark and cold. Right now we have a little bit of a cold, not loving that, but it doesn't last that long, so it'll be fine. We're definitely excited for the upcoming warmer weather and just to be outside more. Throughout history, there has been several instances where people have claimed to have these supernatural abilities, and this allows them to communicate with those that are no longer here or those not even from here. Even myself, I've had my own experiences where I have communicated with spirits, and I've even seen them as plainly as seeing another person, like as plainly as I would have seen you. But some have even claimed to be able to communicate with a higher power, with a god. Today we're diving into some of those mystics, or rather oracles, starting with the infamous Oracle of Delphi. For almost 2,000 years, the Oracle of Delphi was the most prominent religious figure in the ancient Greek world. She was a priestess and soothsayer who practiced in the Temple of Apollo at the ancient sanctuary of Delphi on Mount Parnassus. Might have pronounced that part wrong. Apollo was the Greek god of the arts and prophecy, who would also sometimes ride his sun chariot across the sky when the sun god Helios was unable to. The Oracle of Delphi was a human woman who would be carefully selected by the priests of the sanctuary. And when one Pythia, which was another word for the oracle, would die, another would simply take her place as the high priestess. She was a woman over 50 who lived separate from her husband and was dressed in maiden's clothes. Many believe the oracle to be a messenger of the god Apollo himself. It was actually believed that Gaia first inhabited Delphi. Gaia is essentially Mother Earth. She was around long before the gods. Her son Python, who was a mighty serpent or dragon, guarded the area, and Gaia appointed the nymph Daphnis as prophetess. So essentially, she was the first oracle of Delphi. Ancient Delphi was a sacred site that was chosen by Zeus. Zeus is the king of the gods, the god of the sky, thunder, and lightning. Zeus had sent 2 eagles from Mount Olympus to find the center of Earth. One of the eagles went east, while the other went west. The eagles crossed at a site that was nestled between the 2 towering rocks of Mount Parnassus. Zeus would then declare Delphi as the center of the world and marked it with a sacred stone called omphalos, which meant navel. Zeus would actually find the stone that was said to be the omphalos within the temple. Apollo would go on to kill Python, and its body would fall into a fissure in the earth. And it's said that Python's decomposing body would give off strong fumes from the fissure, and that this is where Apollo decided his oracle would sit. Before the Greeks had claimed Delphi as their sacred place, archaeological evidence shows that there is a long history of occupation. There's evidence of a Mycenaean settlement, which would have been 1600 BC to 1100 BC, and this could have contained an earlier temple to the Mother Earth or Gaia. From about 1200 BCE, the Oracle of Delphi would channel Apollo and tell her prophecies. A large temple for Apollo would be built between the 7th and 8th century. Accounts vary. It would be built by priests of Apollo from Crete, and this would become the most important structure in Delphi. It would burn down in 548 BCE, when a new temple would be built. The oracle would decide the type of seed or grain that would be planted, offer consultation on private matters, and even dictate the day of a battle, like the day it would be waged. She was incredibly powerful. Like, her word was law. The Oracle of Delphi was not the only oracle in ancient Greece. Actually, they were really common, but the Oracle of Delphi was definitely the most popular. They were believed to have been able to communicate with whichever god that they served. And like I said, the Oracle of Delphi was by far the most famous one. Leaders of ancient empires, along with regular people, would go to seek her advice. So literally anyone. According to Plutarch's records, people could only speak with the oracle 9 days out of a year. This was 1 day a month over the 9 warmest months. No one could ask her advice during the cold months because it was believed that Apollo had left for warmer climate during the winter in a mythical land called Hyperboreans. He would not return until spring. So obviously she couldn't seek his advice if he wasn't there, right? The popularity of the oracle spread so much that 2 priestesses would end up sharing the job by rotating most days for 9 months out of the year. In order to speak to the Oracle of Delphi, you would have to give a gift, essentially. There was the Palanos, or ritual cake, and a sacrificial animal that conformed to rigid physical standards. The oracle and her consultants would bathe in the Catalian spring, and then she would drink from the sacred spring Casatus before entering the temple. There she would go into a basement cell called the Iaton and sit on a sacred tripod. She would chew the leaves of the laurel, which was Apollo's sacred tree, and then she would go into this trance-like state and channel Apollo. The oracle would even fast for days before communicating with the god and abstained from sex. People wanted to be in control of Delphi because of the oracle. That's just how powerful she was. Originally, Delphi was under the control of the Amphictyonic League. The league consisted of 12 religious leaders from different tribes of ancient Greece. Delphi was an autonomous state after the First Sacred War. The First Sacred War started in 595 BCE when the neighboring state Crissa disrespected the religious site. There are different accounts about what actually initiated the war. Some say that the oracle was captured, obviously with how important she was, that would start a war, and that the temple was vandalized. After the war, the oracle rose to prominence and Delphi became a powerful city-state. There would be 5 sacred wars, in which 2 of them were for the control of Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi would give a prophecy or a donation. And if you wanted to move up in the line, you could. It was possible, but you'd have to give another donation. Delphi did not belong to any of the other Greek states. They were neutral in war, and the sanctuary was open to everyone. Delphi was also the site of the Pan-Hellenic Games. These games were incredibly popular throughout ancient Greece. The first of the games were called the Pythian Games, and they were used to mark the end of the First Sacred War. They were held during the summer months, once every 4 years. There's still some evidence of the games there today, The site contains ruins of an ancient gym where the games had taken place. The Pythian Games began as a musical contest, which is extremely fitting for Apollo. And then later on, they would add athletic contests. Greeks from many city-states that made up the Greek Empire would go there to compete. The games were held in Apollo's honor. This was covered by the donations that were given to the Oracle. The beginning of the games is said to tie into Apollo killing Python and Zeus being unhappy about it. So they were essentially penance for Apollo's crimes. I feel like having games as a penance is pretty cool. But the winner would receive a crown of laurel leaves, which are the same leaves that are burned before in consolation with the oracle. People from ancient Persia and even Egypt would travel to consult the Oracle of Delphi. Should be consulted before every major state undertaking, any beginning of a war or founding of a new nation state. When the oracle would go into her trance-like state while infusing the fumes that were said to be Python's decomposing body, sounds quite disgusting, and the speaking of Apollo, the prophecies she spoke would then be translated by the priests. Some sources say that the oracle's prophecies were spoke in dactylic hexameters, which meant they were spoke rhythmically. The verse would then be interpreted by the priests of Apollo and told to the person who had asked the question to the oracle. Her prophecies would often not really make sense. They were essentially riddles and would often sound like advice rather than predictions of the future. Strangely, there are several accounts where these predictions did come true. One of the most well-known early predictions from the Oracle of Delphi happened when a lawmaker from Athens named Solon had visited the oracle twice in 594 BCE. The first visit regarded the plan to capture the island of Salamis. The second was about reforms he wanted to introduce. The first time the oracle said this: "First sacrifice to the warriors, who once had their home in this island, whom now the rolling plain of fair Asopia covers, laid in the tombs of heroes, with their faces turned to the sunset." Solon listened to the oracle's advice and successfully captured the island for Athens. When Solon returned to the oracle, she told him this: "Seat yourself now. Amidships for you are the pilot of Athens. Grasp the helm fast in your hands. You may have many allies in your city." Solon believed this meant that he should avoid the course he was on and not become a rebellious tyrant. Instead, he introduced reforms that benefited the population. He introduced trial by jury and taxation proportional to income. And he even forgave all prior debt, which meant the poor could rebuild their lives, which is amazing. Solon required all the magistrates to swear an oath to uphold the laws he had introduced. And if they failed to do that, then they would have to build a statue of the Oracle of Delphi equal to their weight in gold. Another prediction that would come true was given to King Croesus of Lydia, which is now Turkey, in 560 BCE. King Croesus was said to be one of the wealthiest men in history, but he was also extremely arrogant. Croesus would visit the oracle to get advice on his plan to invade Persia, and he interpreted her response arrogantly. The oracle told him that if he invaded Persia, that he would destroy a great empire. He took this as he would destroy Persia, but instead, he was the one who was defeated. One of the most famous predictions made by the Oracle of Delphi refers to the Persian Wars. The Persian Wars are the Greco-Persian conflict that was fought from 492 BCE to 449 BCE. A delegation from Athens had traveled to Delphi because of the upcoming invasion by the son of Darius the Great of Persia. The delegation wanted a prediction about the upcoming war. At first, they were not very happy with what the oracle had said because she said they needed to retreat. So they went back and asked again, kind of like a magic 8-ball. This time, she gave them a longer answer. She talked if Zeus providing the Athenians with a wall of wood that would protect them. The Athenians argued about what the second prediction had meant. Ultimately, they decided Apollo had wanted them to make sure they had a large fleet of wooden ships to defend them from the Persian invasion. The oracle was right, and the Athenians had successfully repelled the Persian attack in the naval battle of Salamis. The Oracle of Delphi was also consulted by Sparta, who Athens had asked for help in their defense of Greece. And at first she told them not to fight because the attack was coming during one of their most sacred religious festivals. King Leonidas decided to ignore the advice and sent 300 soldiers to help defend Greece, in which they were all killed in the Battle of Thermopylae. Although this was a tragic loss, it did help ensure Greece's later victory at Salamis, which ended the Greco-Persian Wars. The Oracle of Delphi would make predictions until around 390 BCE, when the Roman Emperor Theodosius would ban pagan religions. He would not only ban all ancient Greek religions and religious practices, but also the Pan-Hellenic games. Many of the ancient Greek religious artifacts would have been destroyed at Delphi, and Christians would settle on the sacred site, which is kind of disgusting, honestly. But what was the Oracle of Delphi breathing in? Were those fumes really Python's decomposing body? And Apollo speaking to her? Originally, scholars thought the Delphic fault was a myth. However, it was proven in the 1980s when a group of scientists and geologists discovered that the temple ruins sat on not one, but two faults. The temple was actually built where the two faults crossed. The sanctuary was built around a sacred spring, and it was because of this spring that the oracle was able to communicate with Apollo. The crossing of the two faults meant that the site was prone to earthquakes, which created friction along the lines, releasing methane and ethylene into the water that ran beneath the temple. So was it all just a hallucination? Or maybe this just allowed the oracle to break the boundary and actually be able to speak to a god. Today, there are so many instances of people communicating with higher powers or ancestors, the spirit world, with the use of plants or specific natural elements. Shamans have been doing it for years. So was this all just hallucinations, or was it something more? Let me know in the comments what you think. And let's dive into our next case, which is a little bit more recent. And that is the Fox sisters. Psychics and mediums are something that is rather well known and really pretty accepted today. People go to them to talk to their loved ones or get advice about life and the future. But the Fox sisters may have actually started the psychic movement of the 19th century. There were 3 Fox sisters, Leah, Kate, and Maddie. It was a March night in 1848. 2 young girls by the name of Maggie, 14, and Kate, 11, lived in a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York. Every night, the family would hear a series of raps on the walls and furniture, noises that seemed to come from nowhere. Their mother, Margaret, was scared, but their father, John, was skeptical. Margaret told the neighbors about the noises, and they were skeptical, so she told them to come and hear the noises for themselves. They joined the girls in the small chamber that they shared with their parents. Maggie and Kate huddled together on their bed while their mother began the demonstration. "Now count to 5, she said. Then came 5 heavy thuds. "Count 15, and it obeyed. She then asked what the neighbor's age was, and 35 raps followed. If you are injured, spirit manifest it by 3 raps, and it did. What Margaret didn't know is that her daughters had developed a prank by cracking their joints and snapping their big and second toes together against the wooden floors or furniture. They were able to make sounds loud enough to wake their parents. And with the neighbors now involved, they were scared that they would get in trouble. So they continued the ruse. Their sister Leah had heard of what had happened. And shortly after, the Fox family moved from Hinesville, and Maggie and Kate went to live with her sister in Rochester, New York. Some believe that Leah wanted to capitalize on her sister's prank and people's interest in the spirits associated with it. Rochester was a hotbed for reform and religious activity at this time, and the Finger Lakes region of New York gave birth to both Mormonism and Millerism, the precursor to Seventh-day Adventism. There was a rumor that there was a spirit that belonged to a peddler that had been murdered in the farmhouse the Fox sisters lived in 5 years ago. This intrigued Isaac and Amy Post, along with the Fox sister story, and a group of residents in Rochester had even examined the cellar of the girls' home and found strands of hair and what looked to be bone fragments. The Posts invited the girls to a gathering at their home. They wanted to see if they could talk to spirits in another location. Isaac Post said that he went in with a lot of disbelief, but was swayed when he heard very distinct thumps under the floor and several what seemed to be answers. He was further convinced when Leah Fox seemed to be a medium and communicated with the family's recently deceased daughter. The Post would rent the largest hall in Rochester, and 400 people came to see the girls and watch the phenomenon. After, Amy Post took the sisters to a private room where they undressed and were examined by a group of skeptics, which is actually really disturbing. Nobody found any evidence that this was a hoax. While news of the Fox sisters' abilities spread, so did the ideas of Emanuel Swedenborg. He was an 18th century Swedish philosopher and mystic. Swedenborg said that the afterlife consisted of 3 heavens, 3 hells, and an interim destination, which was the world of the spirits, and essentially where everyone went immediately after they died. Kind of like a purgatory. It was similar to what they were used to here on earth. Self-love drives the spirit towards one of the hells, where love for others would bring you to the heavens. He said that the Lord casts no one into hell, but those who are there have deliberately cast themselves into it and keep themselves there. He claimed to have the ability to talk and see spirits on every plane. 75 years later, in the 19th century, a man by the name of Andrew Jackson Davis, who would be known as John the Baptist of modern spiritualism, would say that Swedenborg's spirit had spoke to him during a series of trances. Davis recorded the messages and published them in 1847 in The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and a Voice of Mankind. He said, quote, "It is a truth that spirits commune with one another while one is in the body and the other in the higher spheres. All the world will hail with delight the ushering in of that era, when the interiors of men will be opened, and the spiritual communication will be established." He believed that his prediction had come true a year later, when the Fox sisters first channeled the spirits in their bedroom. He wrote in his diary, "About daylight this morning, a warm breathing passed over my face, and I heard a voice, tender and strong, saying, 'Brother, good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born.'" Kind of sounds culty wording. Anyways, after he heard about their experiences in Rochester, he invited them to his home, naturally, in New York City, to see their medium abilities himself, because why wouldn't he? Joining the sisters elevated his status from obscure prophet to recognized leader of a mass movement. And this movement appealed to a lot of Americans because they wanted something great to believe in. Maggie, Kate, and Leah would go on tour to spread the word of spirits. They booked a suite at Barnum's Hotel on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane. Not everyone believed in their abilities, though. An editorial in the Scientific American called the girls the spiritual knockers from Rochester. They conducted their sessions in the hotel's parlor and invited around 30 people to gather around a large table at the hours of 10 a.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m., even occasionally taking private meetings in between. Admissions was $1. Some of the visitors included Horace Greeley, who was the influential editor of the New York Tribune, James Fenimore Cooper, editor and poet William Cullen Bryant, and abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. They would witness a session where the spirits rapped in time to a popular song and spelled out the message, "Spiritualism will work, miracles and the cause of reform." Leah stayed in New York hosting seances. Kate and Maggie would go to other cities. While they were in Philadelphia, one of their visitors was explorer Elijah Kane. He didn't believe in the Fox sisters' abilities, but he was quite taken with Maggie. He would then go on to court Maggie, who was 13 years younger than him, and even encouraged her to give up her life as a medium. She agreed and went to attend school in which Kane had paid for, and they would get married. Only 5 years later, in 1857, Kane would end up dying. And this threw Maggie into a great, very dark depression. She converted to be a Catholic in honor of his memory and started drinking heavily because of her depression. But she vowed to keep her promise to her late husband and forever abandon spiritualism. Kate, on the other hand, married a devout spiritualist and continued to develop her medium powers. She would communicate in many different ways, such as communicating 2 messages simultaneously, writing one while speaking the other, writing messages in reverse script, and utilizing blank cards, which words would magically appear on. During sessions with a wealthy banker named Charles Livermore, she had summoned both his deceased wife and Benjamin Franklin, who had announced his presence by writing his name on a card. Her business really took off during and after the Civil War. Many people had lost their loved ones and had found comfort in spiritualism. So much so, more psychics and mediums would pop up, and by the end of the 1880s, there's around 8 million spiritualists in the United States, which is a lot. Well, this was in the United States and Europe. These new practitioners expected to be able to do the same thing Kate could, like summoning full apparitions at every seance. All of the pressure and work got to Kate, though, and she would start to drink. On October 21st, 1888, the New York World published an interview with Maggie Fox, gearing up for her appearance that evening at the New York Academy of Music, where she would publicly denounce spiritualism. Maggie was paid $1,500 for the exclusive, which is a lot of money back then. She said that her main motivation was her rage at her sister Leah and other leading spiritualists who had publicly shamed Kate for her drinking and had even accused her of being unfit to take care of her 2 young children. Kate was in the audience while her sister gave her speech. Maggie went on to say, "My sister Katie and I were very young children when this horrible deception began. At night, when we went to bed, we used to tie an apple on a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor. Or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. They would move from an apple to manipulating their knuckles, joints, and toes to make rapping sounds." She went on to say, "A great many people, when they hear the rapping, imagine at once that the spirits are touching them. It is a very common delusion. Some very wealthy people came to see me some years ago when I lived in 42nd Street, and I did some rapping for them. I made the spirit rap on the chair, and one of the ladies cried out, "I feel the spirit tapping me on the shoulder." Of course, that was pure imagination. She then offered to demonstrate. She took off her shoe and placed her right foot on a wooden stool. The room fell silent, and what was heard was a number of short little raps. Maggie insisted that her sister Leah knew and exploited her younger sisters. Before she left the stage, she thanked God that she was able to expose spiritualism. The press called this a death blow to the movement, and spiritualists quickly took sides. Leah claims that Maggie was simply an attention seeker who had denounced spiritualism for a $1,500 speaking fee. Strangely enough, Maggie recanted her confession only a year later. She said, "At the time, I was in great need of money, and people took advantage of the situation. The excitement upset my mental equilibrium. When I made those dreadful statements, I was not responsible for my words." Withdrawing her confession actually caused more disgust with the spiritualist community. She never mended things with her sister Leah, who had passed in 1890. Kate would die 2 years later while on a drinking spree, and Maggie 8 months after in March of 1893. That year, spiritualists formed the National Spiritualist Association, which is now called the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. So could this have possibly started as a prank, but led to something greater, where they actually developed abilities to communicate with the dead? Or was this a prank that turned con? It's said that we're born with the ability to connect to the other side. Everyone is. But it's a skill. And some people are born with a more natural ability where they don't have to work as hard to develop it. But everyone has the capability of doing it. It's no different than learning to speak or write, learning to cook or draw. The more we practice, the better we get. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think that these were just hoaxes? I mean, there definitely are psychic hoaxes out there. Not saying that. But could this also be that they were actually truly seeing or hearing something? Is that possible? I want to hear all of your guys' thoughts. I also want to hear if you have had any of your own paranormal experiences. I want to start sharing them on my podcast. If you do want to share them with me, you can go ahead and email me at supernaturalsessionspodcast@gmail.com. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to rate this 5 stars, and also make sure you're following. If you're over on YouTube, make sure to like this video and make sure you're subscribed. Also, commenting something below helps so much. I really want to build a community that is very accepting of people's beliefs, and whether you believe in this stuff or not, whether you believe in magical creatures or not, or spirits, even if it only interests you, like just a very strong, supported, magical community. So you can just go ahead and click that, and it'll lead you right over to my YouTube. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and until my next episode, stay spooky.